We're gonna get we're gonna get moving in a sec, and anyway, so as I was talking to the people from the Signal this morning about Passover, the interview show, it's called The Buzz. It's like a morning talk show, and we were talking about Passover and some Passover traditions, and of course, people always want to ask about Passover food, which is important. But yeah, it's going to be interesting this year. I think. Um, I mean, not every Passover, has interesting dynamics, but I think the last few Passovers have been pretty interesting. I mean, last year at Passover we had people that were still being literally held hostage, but this year we have people who are unfortunately in Israel living in and out of their bomb shelters for Passover this year. So that's upsetting and not something we want to have to think about. Hopefully, next year's Passover will not be a time of thinking about war and thinking about people being held hostage. And I was thinking about an interesting Passover piece of history was that in 1980, Barry Rosen was one of the 50 or so Americans held hostage by the Iranians in Tehran, the students that were holding the um, the American hostages for a little over almost 16 months. Uh, so Barry was one of those, and he celebrated a Passover in captivity in Iran. And they actually were able to bring him a Haggadah. From what I remember, they were able to bring him a Haggadah. I don't think he celebrated Passover per se, but he did celebrate a Passover there. And you know, who knows? Maybe next year people will be able to celebrate Passover and freedom in Iran next year. There are, of course, thousands of Jews that still live in Iran, but it's not a great situation for them. They are um, living in fear, but they've lived there for 2,500 years and they didn't want to leave. So I guess that's part of our Passover 2026 story. Anyways, as we look at where we are in our journey, we're at the beginning of Abraham's journey, Abraham and Sarah's journey. Um, yeah, to catch people up, we read 2 weeks ago. We read about the Tower of Babel and the separation of nations. After that, in chapter 11, and then we get this interesting begot long list of not super long, but long enough list of the generations from Noah's children to Abraham and Sarah. And then we read about Avram's blessing last week. That's where we finished after the first 9 verses. This is where we finished, which was, or sorry, 3 verses. And the blessing that Avram gets in Genesis 12:3, as I shared with you, this is a blessing that Christians oftentimes still identify with when they bless the Jewish people. And as I mentioned, I have Christians that regularly come up to me and say, I bless the Jewish people every day. Because again, this blessing that if you bless the people of Abraham, you will be blessed. And those that curse, you will be cursed. The families of the world will bless themselves by you. So Avram, uh, and of course Sarah and his family, will be blessed and be a source of blessing to people. And as we mentioned, and as we finished last week, that is the inspiration for the song Lechi Lach, which is based on the words Lech Lecha, go get yourself. And that is the way chapter 12 begins. It's the name of the Torah portion. Again, the Torah portion name usually comes from the first few words of the Bible, but Vayomer Adonai Avram, that God spoke to Avram and then said, Lech Lecha, those are the words that we use for that. Um, so what's interesting is this is the third portion in Genesis, which means that if we are reading this as part of the weekly Parsha, this is the third week. So this is usually read usually around October, um, conceivably beginning of November. Um, and we read everything that we've read over the last 10 weeks in two. And that's why if you study weekly by the Parsha, you got to skip over a lot of stuff. It's just impossible to do that. So today, we're going to look at the next part of Abraham's journey. He makes it to the land of Israel here, which is there's two versions of this story, as I mentioned. In one version, his father started the journey. His father came as far as Haran in one journey, in one version of the journey. In another, he has to pick himself up and take himself all the way there. Um, Either way, as we mentioned last week, according to tradition, this seems the universal tradition, is that Avram is from Far East. He's from the East Coast, if you will. He's from Ur, which in those days was the center of civilization. It was literally the capital city of Mesopotamia, and to some extent, the most advanced city of humanity at that moment. Which, as I pointed out, means that Avram left the safety, security, technological, and industrial, well, not really industrial, but agricultural revolution, but the industry and the city life that they had in Ur for a very, very less developed part of the world, the Fertile Crescent, specifically the land of Israel, the land of Canaan, as it's known at this point, which was a it was a junction stop between Egypt and Mesopotamia, but by itself was not um, a very important part of the world at that time. And for much of the time, it does not have a lot of arable land. It does not have major rivers. It doesn't have a confluence of the types of draws that bring people to a place, but it's a stop. I've compared it to the parts of our country that we call flyover country. It's not a place where people would necessarily feel like they have to settle, which is one of the reasons, or necessarily be drawn to, which is one of the interesting things that God commands Avram to settle there. And as I pointed out last week, Avram's journey is more of a Green Acres story of somebody who leaves the big city life for the country. We don't think about it that way, but that's the way the Bible tells it. He decided to, or he didn't decide, God decided, but he follows through with it. He makes this move to a much less developed, and again, maybe there's something to be said for people who choose to live in the suburbs, in the exurbs. They make that choice. So that's where we finished. And now we're going to continue with his journey. I will point out we were introduced to Avram last week and to his wife Sarai. What we have not been told, because again, it's just here. Um, why? We don't know why God chooses him. There's no indication of here anything about why Avram is the guy. Why his family are descendants of Shem, but we don't know why this specific part of the family, why this specific guy, this man and this woman are chosen. We have no indication, which is why we have the wonderful midrash that helps explain it. As I mentioned, the midrash of Avram destroying his father's idols, that Avram figured out that there was only one God, or the other tradition that Avram was schooled in the higher form of religion, if you will, by his ancestors Shem, Noah's son, and Eber, who had still been alive when Avram was born. The midrash that Avram shows his fortitude and his courage against Nimrod, the king who tries to destroy him in the midrash. All those are possibilities because the midrash builds on the fact that we know nothing about Avram's background until he's called. And even then, we don't learn a lot, but we are going to learn a little. Caution, what we learned today does not make the case that Avram is the right guy to be the first Jew. I'll just say that. But let's read it. Let's jump into the text and read one of the first narratives. I mean, kind of read a little bit about him being called, but let's read a story about Avram and conversations. We'll actually hear Avram speak for the first time in this day today. So this will be our first introduction to our ancestor Avram, and not just our ancestor, but the ancestor for Muslims, the ancestor for Christians, the ancestor for everyone who calls himself Abrahamic after this guy. All right, Rosemary, would you like to read for us verse 4?
Could you make the font a little bigger?
Sure.
Thank you.
There you go. Absolutely.
Okay. Abram went forth as God had commanded him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran. Abram took his wife Sarai and his brother's son Lot, and all the wealth that they had amassed, and the persons that they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan. When they arrived in the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land as far as the site of Shechem at the terebinth of Moreh. The Canaanites were then in the land.
All right. So there's some critical information here that we just learned. There's a little bit, right? There's a little bit of there's a little bit that we need to explain. One of the interesting pieces here is that, well, there's several things, but let's take a look at a couple of the pieces that we need to explain. First of all, according to the text, at least again following this version, that he was in Haran when he started the journey, which was in modern day Syria. Harun is a city in modern day Syria. That he was at least partly on his way towards Canaan with his father got as far as Haran. It also says he's 75 years old when this happens, which again, that's about halfway through his life. He's going to live to be about 175. So he's middle-aged at best. But he's also definitely at an age when he already was supposed to have children, because they did think that people would have kids around the time they're 30. Based on the begots that we just had before, he is supposed to have had a kid so far. So we know that he doesn't have a child. He's with Sarai, his wife, and he's also with his nephew Lot. Now remember, Lot's father dies, right? Lot's father dies back here. Haran was also the name of Lot's father, right? Maybe that's why Haran was named after Lot's father. We don't know. But the fact is that Lot is Avram's nephew, but he also doesn't have a father. So Avram's kind of taken him in. First, the grandfather took him in, and now Avram's kind of taken him in. And Lot is the first of several almost children that Avram will have before he finally has his child that we have a lineage through, Isaac. This is the first one, Lot. So Lot is his nephew, biologically related to him through his brother. Brother dies. So there's no question that Lot would have there'd be a natural connection and a real connection out of family connection, but also, that loss. But Avram has not had a child yet. That's very important. Now, it also says that they had a lot of wealth that they had amassed. Not really sure how that happens, but of course, the traditional interpretation is once you've been blessed by God, good things start happening. Your sheep start having a lot of babies. They survive, they grow. Your flocks grow. You make some good business deals. They all become successful. Every time you risk some funds, you get reward off it. Doesn't always happen, but when God's blessing you, it happens. So they acquire a lot of money, have a lot of wealth. It also says that they acquired people. The word is ve'et hanefesh asher asu. Now, the word nephesh, by the way, is a singular. It's a singular form of the word nephesh, a person. It's also the word we use for spirit. And it's not just a slave, right? I mean, it's not necessarily a slave. If you saw the word eved, that would be servants. This isn't the normal word for it. It's not the normal word for people that they acquired. But it could be. I mean, it could. But the Midrash will not have it because the easy word to use for that is a person, anashim, avadim, slaves, but it says nefesh. So what is going on here?
King
What is
James
the
says
Midrash on here?
King James says souls.
Yes, which is the great translation of the word nefesh. That's the word we use for soul, right? When we say someone has a nefesh, that's their spirit, that's their soul. We also use the word neshama, right? These are words that imply like a deeper sense of who you are. It could also be, it could be people, but it's an unusual word. It's not the normal word. So of course there's an interpretation here. What is the midrashic interpretation here? What is it that Avram and Sarai have done? Anybody? What do you think the traditional interpretation is going to be? I mean, the midrash, if you will. What do you think the midrash is here?
They've converted people.
Yeah, absolutely, Rosemary. 100%. Yes. They've made converts. They've already started bringing people into the tent, if you will. They have made converts. So they haven't acquired people in the sense that they've like owned them. They're bringing people into the community. They have started converting people. Now, this, by the way, is an interesting idea because within the midrash, the traditional midrash on this is a midrash that encourages, I'll put it that way, conversionary activity amongst Jews. So 2,000 years ago, we talked about this on the Wednesday night class over the last couple of times. We talked about, not the last time we talked about Islam, but the times before, Jews were converting people to Judaism up till the time of Christianity becoming the official religion of the Roman Empire. And what was the basis for that kind of activity? What would justify Jews going out and making converts? Avram and Sarah, making people in Haran. So up till 2,000 years ago, this was kind of a proof text for conversionary activity. If the first Jews did it, why wouldn't we all do it? Of course, then when it became punishable by death, Jews said, we don't do that. We don't convert people. Nowadays, there's people who interpret this back to, yeah, why not? Let's open our tents. Now, again, proselytization, doesn't have to be aggressive. It doesn't have to be, hey, you better convert to Judaism, otherwise you're going to die. You're going to go to hell. Your bad things will happen to you. But it can be, hey, Judaism's a wonderful tradition, and we'd like to make it open to you, just like our ancestors Avram and Sarah did for everybody else too. So this is the midrash that has kind of found new life in our own day, where people start looking at this in a different way. Any questions, comments?
I've never heard it before. That's the first time I've ever, because I've always thought of us as a non-proselytizing religion.
Yep. Well, according to the Christian Bible, the early Christians made fun of us for the amount of proselytization that we did, that the, you know, yeah, that we spent a lot of time and money going around the world bringing people into the Jewish world. And as we said on the Wednesday night class, a lot of those people that were kind of on the fence, that were interested in Judaism but didn't want to make that final step, and you know that, the God-fearers, a lot of those people that were became God-fearers did so because Jews were out there, I would say like full on, you know, Jehovah's Witness like proselytization, but there might have been some of that. I mean, you have to assume that if there's thousands of Jews, and there were thousands of Jews engaged in missionizing activity, if you will, that some of them were aggressive. You're going to get some. It's just that you just know human nature. There's going to be some that are probably a little bit more aggressive than others. Yeah. Look, you see the Chabad kids that sit out in front of a Jewish place and ask people to put on tefillin.
In the grocery store, in front of the
In the
cereal.
grocery store, in front of wherever the Jewish community is, right? They believe
Yeah.
that they're doing a huge mitzvah by helping someone lay tefillin. Now, they only do that to Jews. I'll ask people, are you Jewish? Because if they're not Jewish, they don't have to there's no sense of a mitzvah for putting on tefillin. Actually, they don't want you to put it on unless you're Jewish. But that being said, could you imagine if for the last 2,000 years, people weren't conditioned to not convert people? Would you see some fairly aggressive Jewish missionizing folks that were trying to get people to do Jewish stuff that were not Jewish? 100%. I could totally see it. And I could see people who'd be aggressive, and you'd be like, oh, why is that person doing that? Making you feel uncomfortable. Just as I'm sure there's Christians that are uncomfortable with some of the proselytization that goes on by Christians. So we don't have that problem, but or that challenge. I just qualified my yes. I don't wouldn't feel comfortable with it, but I do think it's important for Judaism to be very open for and much easier for people to make that decision to convert. I think it should be encouraged, and I think Jews should be proud of their faith and hope that people decide to take it on, not because they'll be saved if they do, but because Judaism offers something. Look, I always tell people this, and I'm fairly passionate about this. This is one of the things that I do that does excite me and makes me want to, be engaged and involved in, is I've made this point, and some of you have heard me say it. Look, as Jews, we tend to be very opinionated, and we tend to love telling you why, you know, Vaughn's or Ralph's or Gelson's is the best grocery store. We have no issue telling you why you should be going to Costco. We have no issue telling, giving our opinions and advice on, what the best hotel chain is and what the best whatever. All of a sudden, when we start talking about our Judaism and our faith and our traditions, we start, yeah, we don't want to make it sound like we're making you feel bad, and so we tend to overcompensate for it and start to make excuses, and also, not really understand that, hey, it's okay to tell somebody that you think your tradition is really good and it really works for me. I've always wondered why people, and again, I know why, because we've been conditioned for thousands of years to be afraid. But I don't understand why we shouldn't be. I mean, we shouldn't be afraid to tell people, yeah, Judaism's really great, works for me. If you're if you're interested in it, here's some resources, here's some places you can learn more. I don't get it. I don't get it why that's like the one thing that we're gonna get back off on, because again, we've been conditioned and we've been told that we're not supposed to do it. And of course, we don't like it when other people tell us why their faith is better. But I mean, generally speaking, as long as someone's not doing it in an obnoxious way, I don't care. I don't care if a Muslim person tells me why they think Islam is the best religion, or a Christian person tells it's the best religion for them, and they make the case for why it's the best religion for me. I don't mind. I'll listen. I'm
I think
open-minded.
historically, it's been because we associate a lot of suffering with being Jewish. It's a heavy mantle to carry, and
Yeah.
it's not necessarily salvation. You do it because you want to, not because you want to be saved.
Yes. Well, it's also, you make a good point, and it's also because most of us are the faith we are because we were born into it. But at a certain point, when we take on our faith and our tradition and say, this is ours, I don't think there's anything wrong with telling people, hey, it's a good religion, it could be good for you. Again, we don't believe that you have to be Jewish in order to be saved. That concept doesn't work with us. But to tell somebody, hey, this is a faith, this is a tradition that encourages human development, that encourages, I think, the best aspects of of personal responsibility and commitment to others, and has a good balance of individual self self improvement and self growth, with also a commitment to helping others. I mean, I think there's wonderful faiths that focus on meditation and spiritual enlightenment and things like that, but they don't do a whole lot for anybody else. Judaism also tells us we got to go out and and help other people. That when we see people who are suffering on the street, that we don't turn our backs on them and go, sorry, I got to go meditate. So I think Judaism has a good approach to those kind of things. But again, I'm just telling you, it exists here as a text that people have reinterpreted in our day. This line is, if you will, the place where people are making the case for Judaism to however you want to understand proselytization, however you want to understand the open tent, however you want to understand making ourselves a more accessible faith. It comes from here. It comes from this line. Asher asu, the hanefesh asher asu, the people, the spirits, the souls that they made, and everyone who helps to some extent bring out and elevate somebody's soul is doing what Avram and Sarah did, right? And not because they're going to heaven now, but because they have helped somebody's soul be connected to the Holy One and to the community and to tradition and to the text. And that's what you do. You actually kind of give somebody, a new start, a fresh start. So that is one of the important parts here. We also see here that Avram goes as far as Shechem. Let's just share one real quick second.
I do want to say, at the age of 71, of packing up my house and everything and moving to a whole nother different state, I have a lot of respect for this guy who packed up his Subaru or whatever and
Yeah.
yeah,
Made his journey.
yeah.
Yeah.
He took the
So
wife, and she went too. My poor husband, I said, go, and he went.
it is not an easy thing. You think about people
You
who've
know,
made journeys, who've made moves. I am those who know me, I have been in my same house for 28 years and I have no intention of moving anytime soon. I don't like moving. I am the opposite of Abraham on that.
oh, it's
A-
awful.
Abraham is the always moving guy, right? He's the guy who's we're going to see and never sit still. And so where he starts is up here in Aram. He's up here in Syria, and then he makes his way down to his first stop is Shechem, which is right here. Now, this is in the what will be the northern kingdom. This is in the tribe of Manasseh, right on the border with Ephraim, and there's Jerusalem, right? So Jerusalem is right here, and the tribe of Benjamin. So this is, all kind of central Israel. This is all area we say today, of course, is the West Bank, or what we call Judea and Samaria. These are the areas that are the heartland of the Judean people, the Jewish people, the people that are, Abraham all the way down through David and Solomon. These are people who, again, there's Bethlehem, Bethlehem, Hebron, which is where Avram's buried. But this area right here, from about here down to here, this is where Avram spends much of his time. He is going to go as far south as here, but the real heartland right here is the places like Shechem, Bethel, uh, Hebron. Those are all the areas in the central area. And it's not far, by the way. We're talking about, again, about from here to here is about 50 miles. That's it. So we're not, this is not a long spot. This is, roughly from here to, Santa Clarita to LAX is about how far we're talking. It's not far. So, yeah, this is not a large area. You see the cities, and those cities are, in some cases, the next town over. All right, so they go to, and the terebinth is a fancy way of saying an oak grove, an alone. That's the word alone, the alone moray, and it's not one, right? A terebinth is a small forest, if you were, a small, not an orchard, but something a little bit between an orchard and a forest. That's a terebinth, and these are oaks. So that's why the Camp Alonim, or the name alone, means oak. So terebinth is just a fancy way of saying an oak grove, if you will. And it says, of course, the Canaanites were living there. That's the people who are, from what we understand, both historically, archaeologically, according to the Bible, this area is dominated by the people we call the Canaanites. How different are they from us? Difficult to say. What we do know is that according to tradition, Avram and his family come from further to the east to settle in this area. And they meet, and they're going to interact, the Canaanites and the family of Avram. So here's the way the text continues in verse 7.
God appeared to Abram and said, I will assign this land to your offspring. And he built an altar there to God who had appeared to him. From there, he moved on to the hill country east of Bethel and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And he built there an altar to God and invoked God by name. Then Abram journeyed by stages toward the Negev. There was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land.
Right. So the first few verses, or whatever, this first 6 verses that we read, is Avram traveling through part of the land, and he gets as far as the Negev, which is, again, down by Beersheba. But every place he goes, so far that we've read, all he does is build an altar. Builds an altar in these places. And God, of course, tells him, "This is your land. This is the land that you're at. I'm your descendants, your children, grandchildren, great grandchildren will be living in this land." And so he dedicates altars in these places. Now, seems like a good thing to do. Seems like a noble thing to do. Avram does not build cities. Unlike other mythological ancestors of people, in other traditions, our ancestor does not build a single city. He does not build a city. He builds altars. He doesn't build a city. He doesn't even seem to stay in any one place for that long. He is definitely going from place to place. The altars, of course, are going to be important later on because these places like Bethel and Ai and uh, Shechem, these will be holy places for the Israelites. Now, once Jerusalem is going to be built, and once Jerusalem becomes the altar, the only place, these other altars become problematic. These Abrahamic cult cities and altars and locations become problematic because once there's only one place to offer sacrifice, you're not supposed to go to these places that Avram went to. This is a problem. But right here, it gives you an understanding of why they become holy in the first place, which is Avram makes them holy. That's what Avram does. He makes places holy. Now, of course, Jacob will also do similar stuff. Isaac in the middle does a little bit too. But Abraham and especially Jacob will make altars, and these altars seem to be very important for our tradition because, again, we know that they became altars in the northern part of Israel and were sacred sites. But the Jerusalem Kohanim said you can't go there anymore. And that's, going to be hundreds and hundreds of years later, but maybe not hundreds and hundreds of years after this was written. So the people who still looked at these northern sites as holy places probably weren't really interested in being told you can't worship in these places. So it's also kind of a giveaway of who writes this, right? Who's really hitting us with this stuff. Which is again, interesting from the standpoint of like, what's the agenda? Why are people doing this? Now, we just read one of the key parts of what we're reading today, which is that there is a famine in the land, and Avram goes down to Egypt. This is the crisis that is the focal point for today, is the scene that we're about to read. See that's coming up.
Rabbi,
There's a famine. Yeah.
what's this about God appearing? Are we going to talk about that, or did I miss that from a couple of weeks ago? God appears to Abraham. What's he look like?
So, interestingly, we're going to read several times that God appears to Abraham. Right here, it says God said to Abraham. We usually assume that the way God speaks is enough to make people feel that if there's not seen, that there's definitely knowledge of God. Here, you're right, absolutely right. God appears to Abraham, and the note is it could be understand or made contact with, not necessarily visual, because sometimes the appearance, if you will, is not visual. I only want to stress that because again, because you brought it up, the translation is that's why there's a little bit of a note there. But God will speak to Avram several times, and for the most part, Avram does not engage in dialogue back and forth. There is a very important scene that we're going to read coming up in a few chapters where Avram 100% engages in a dialogue with God, and it's a very important dialogue. It's Sodom and Gomorrah. But for the most part, God appears to him and he doesn't say anything. He doesn't say anything. Tells him to go. Avram doesn't say anything. God appears to him here. There's not a conversation. At least it's not preserved. So what does that look like? How is God manifesting? God's definitely given him some important information. Um, Oftentimes it's this reinforcement that this is your land. Um, Now I will say though that he doesn't have to see God in a place for him for his establishment of an altar. So, for example, when he goes here uh, to Bethel, he built an altar there. It doesn't say that God saw him and that's why he built an altar. So they're not. It's not predicated on I saw God here or I spoke to God here and there I'm building an altar. It seems like he did this in several cities because he wanted to make those cities holy. He wanted to make them special. Or conversely, the people who lived in those places who worshipped at these altars believed that Avraham was there. So you better say when you're talking about Avraham that he stopped in these places. But he definitely speaks with God, or God speaks to him. As I said, he hasn't spoken back yet. He hasn't responded. Um, but we're going to see some very, very visual appearances. If this isn't a visual appearance, which it could or couldn't be, as you can see that by the comment, and that's not a midrash, by the way. That's not an That's not like a explanation. Sometimes the words vayar, and this is vayira Adonai el Avram. This appearance, sometimes it doesn't seem like it's a visual appearance, so it is possible. However, it was this contact that he makes there, he's going to have it several times. He's going to have, and some of them are very visual, and very dramatic appearances. These so far aren't very well described, or they don't seem to be. But Avram, every time it's got, and so far it's been a couple, Avram will do what God says. Okay,
Does
Um, yeah.
does the Midrash say why there was a famine if Abraham was so blessed?
Yeah, so there are a few times in the Bible where we read about a famine in the land of Israel. And these famines are clearly not just a little, we don't have food this week. These are major famines. Now, the midrash on this is interesting because a lot of the times the midrash on this is that this is a test, right? This is Avram's first test. One of the reasons why we have this first test is because he has another test, right? The test that he has with Isaac. But this seems to be a test. And it's very possible, according to the Midrash, according to the traditional text, that Avram fails this test because there's a famine and Avram goes down to Egypt. So, yeah, the question that Rosemary asks is like God has just told Avram, you get this beautiful, well, you get this land. I'll say it's beautiful, but you get this land, and all of a sudden it's getting hit by famine. Why would God, who's trying to make Avram, feel you'd think feel at home in this new place, hit him with a famine? This is clearly a divine ordained type of activity. God could have stopped the famine from happening, and on the contrary, it seems like God made this happen. And so, what Avram does in this response here, and again, we know the famines in the land of Canaan are critical because we're going to read about the one during Jacob's time, which is how Jacob and his family wind up in Egypt. This is definitely a foreshadowing of that. Famine in the land of Israel, you go to Egypt. Now, it is historically accurate that that was the place where people would go to for food because Egypt had a lot of arable land. The whole area that they would flood in the Nile Delta around Alexandria, and that area was flooded by the Nile, and then they would grow grain there. A very fertile area to grow crops. And so people would go down there to get food. All the way up, by the way, to the Roman Empire, which again, Egypt was the breadbasket for the Roman Empire, and that's why it was so critical for Cleopatra and Mark Antony and all those great guys and women that they had an important that was an important place for food, as we're going to see in Genesis, and we'll see it after Genesis. But Avram going down to Egypt is kind of like that's where you go. It's not surprising he went to Egypt, but as Rosemary points out, it's surprising that God would hit him with this right away. So again, the traditional understanding is this is a test. This is a challenge that Avram needs to demonstrate his faith. Now it seems as though he doesn't do it. And this is why when we talk about why Avram, the first narrative that we're really hit with Avram is not, I mean, well, we'll read it. We'll read it now. But it's problematic. It's not so simple. It's not so simple to say Avram. You'd be hard pressed to say he passes this test. So first of all, where he doesn't pray, he doesn't ask God why is there famine. He doesn't do anything other than goes to Egypt. And here's what happens.
As he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, I know what a beautiful woman you are. If the Egyptians see you and think she is his wife, they will kill me and let you live. Please say that you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that I may remain alive thanks to you.
Yeah, so let's just sit with this little mini story, if you will, for a moment. Avram and his wife Sarai going to Egypt. So you just read it. As they're about to go into Egypt, he tells her, "It's very beautiful, right? I know you're a beautiful woman. That's a wonderful thing to say. You're so beautiful." Then he says, "The Egyptians are going to kill me and take you." By the way, if he's 75 years old right now, It's not that Sarai is a spring chicken, if you will, but I just want to put that out there. It's wonderful that Sarai is still so beautiful that they're going to kill Avram to get her. But there's no evidence that this was going to happen. I mean, there's no line before this that the Egyptians would kill people and take their wives. I mean, where's Avram get this from? There's no text that says before it. You just read it. There's nothing that says that's what the Egyptians are going to do. So, and by the way, I mean, I'm just going to point this out since Rosemary already pointed out a very important thing, which is um, you're going down to Egypt for the because of the famine. That's a dangerous situation. The famine, I get it. But if you're worried that you're going to die, if you go down, you're going to be murdered. Die. You're going to be murdered if you go to Egypt. It's not exactly so safe to go to Egypt. Again, I understand if there's a famine, what are you going to do? But that's your choice. I'm going to risk my life to go down to Egypt to get food, and I'm going to have to lie in order. I mean, look,
He's feeling desperate and vulnerable.
very vulnerable, which is also interesting because, again, Avram has just been called by God. God's appeared to him two times, at least so far. I mean, two times in the text, and yet he feels very vulnerable, feels very fearful, very fearful. I mean, think about how fearful he must have been.
Yeah.
If he's willing to risk his life to go down to Egypt, he must have been very fearful.
Well, they're nomads. They probably don't have weapons. In Egypt, they have great civilization, weapons, and an army.
There's no question. Egypt is one of the superpowers of the ancient world. He's going down there as a person with very little. I mean, he says says he has money, but you know, this is this
Which
is
in
an
itself
interesting
might be
case.
a problem. He's got to protect his goods, right? His people and his goods, and he doesn't feel he can.
Yeah, but he seems to be projecting fears into this situation. That again, perhaps there was a reason for it. Perhaps he had justification for feeling this way, but we don't have it. We don't have this
I gotta
knowledge.
put this out there that a person who hears God talking to them and has paranoid thoughts is not an unusual behavior pattern.
Well, okay,
Yes.
okay, okay, Rosemary, that is a possibility.
Good point, Rosemary.
Uh, but there is a good lesson here too, which is, um, though we don't know that he ever said it, but he said things like it. But the famous Mark Twain quote that worrying is like paying a debt on money you never borrowed, right? On something you don't owe. That's what worry is. Again, we don't know that he said it, but people have said Twain said it. But he said things like that. Yeah, worrying is paying a debt on money you
A
never.
debt paid to disaster before it is due is the way I heard it.
Yeah, it's very. But he didn't say it. I mean, there's no
But yeah,
proof of him.
I think I got that from Robert Heinlein.
Yeah, I think he did. Yeah, he did a version of that. But yeah, it's attributed to Twain. But I've looked it up. He we don't know he said it. But it is a great line, and I've told my kids that before too when they've put themselves in a situation where they project the worst possible situation, or they worry about something that they don't necessarily have a basis to worry about it, and they start worrying about it. And there's a lot of us who do that. We get
Catastrophize.
we
I just went to a program on Jewish anxiety.
Ah! I should have attended that.
yeah, it's something that we're known for. We're very good at it. We're very good at it, but I'd also say that
Well, it's not that we don't have things to be anxious
I
about,
know,
okay?
but it's sometimes we're too good at it. We spend too much time at it. And again, it's very sad when people really legitimately paralyze themselves and are afraid to do things because of the worst possible situation that could come for it, and in some cases, not very likely scenarios where they're worried about something that is not likely going to happen, but yet it stops them from doing what they need to do. Avram seems to have projected this whole scene, which you know, maybe he is maybe he had some occurrence with this. I will say this: there's two versions of this in the Bible. It either happens two times or Avram. There's either two versions, like there were one version that happened to the Egyptians and one that happened with the Canaanites,
Mhm.
or he did this multiple times. However, this works, it's not good. It's not good at any level. It's not good that he had to have that fear. It's not good that he did it. This is problematic. But all I'm saying is we don't know anything really about Avram yet, except for this. And this is kind of an icky story. Um, the midrash on this, which exonerates him a little bit, to some extent, it is that he did have something legitimate to worry about, and the other exoneration, if you will, is that our Avram is not really lying. Sarai is his half sister, so when he says when he says say you're my sister, she's not exactly lying. She's withholding part of the information, but she's not lying by saying she's his sister. So the rabbis felt a little bit better about that. I don't necessarily feel better about that. I'd also like to think that she wasn't his sister. There's a lot of things here that are problematic. There's not really a good version of this story that everybody comes out okay, or that you can go, oh, that's okay. This is not okay. On no
Isn't that
levels.
part of the point that our
Yeah.
ancestors weren't perfect? They're
Yeah.
not.
And this is really, you can really squeeze it off in a lot of different ways, like the rabbis do, and make it like
Yeah.
really tough to get into, but get to that point. But even that isn't good. I don't think you're going to be real happy with that that other answer. All right. Uh yeah, and here's what it says.
Hey, Rabbi, before you go
Yeah.
forward, I got a question for you. Can you scroll up just a little bit? I mean, I
Yeah.
might have missed this or something, but we went from the timeline's very quick here, right? We
Yeah.
go from three kids, right, to dispersing in all the lands, and then Abraham, and now all of a sudden, wham, there's Egyptians. Am I missing something?
Well,
I mean, there's no more backstory. There's no more narrative. There's no more, you know.
you do notice, yes, you do notice, you're 100% right. You notice that there's a lot of stuff that's not there, right? There's a lot of stuff that we have to either fill it in with midrash or our imagination, or um we just don't think about it. We just don't talk about it. But yes, there's a lot of stuff that's missing here. Now, again, hundreds and hundreds of years have elapsed to this point, right? So if people are living 400 or 500 years, then there are people conceivably who have lived again from the time of Adam to now, from Adam and Eve to the time of Abraham. We're talking about 1500 years, 1700 years. So yeah, it's not like tens of thousands of years or 5,000 years, but it's a long time. If human history goes back 57, right, we're 5786. If it goes back 57, let's say 5800, let's just round it to 5800, goes back 5800 years, that means Abraham lives about, probably about, we estimate about 3,800 years ago, 3,900 years ago. This would be about another 1,700 years before, to the time of Adam and Eve. So, yeah, I mean, wouldn't have been a lot of human civilization, but 1,700 years is a long time. So, like, for our ancestors, they can imagine that the Egyptians had grown into an empire by then. I mean, the reality is that none of it works from the archaeology or from the carbon dating and everything else we know scientifically because the pyramids are older than that. So it's not like it's not like we have to back the story up to make sense of it. But our ancestors thought that the Egyptians were already a major power by then, and they were. And they were. The Egyptians had already, by this time, by the time of Abraham, had already come and gone a couple of times their dynasties by this point. So it's pretty amazing. Floyd, you were there not long ago. Days ago, you were there, right?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, they're still pointed on the top. I've seen them.
Well, my point is,
You didn't try to pull this. You didn't try to pull this same game on the Egyptians, by the way, with your lovely wife.
Trade her in.
No, no, no. Just tell people things will go better with me if you tell them you're my sister.
On the other hand, I got 3 camels. So that's
So you did. So you did. You indeed did. So, yeah. But
my point is, the Bible's so important to so many of us and many people, and so many critical things in history have been done in the name of religion and the Bible. Yet there's so many blank, there's so much missing time. And the people that wrote it, right, the authors, there was plenty of people, like if those people could write it, there were plenty of people that could have written all the other stuff as well. Yeah, it would have taken time. Yeah, okay, sure. It's like Game of Thrones. You would have had a lot of those guys in that room, writing the books, and oh my God, I got to write this over and over and over again, But I need you to answer me why. Why are there so
first of all, I can answer part of that by this. There were other texts that were part of these stories. Let's say the Genesis text. We know that there's three. Well, we believe based on the evidence, there's 3 authors that are in the book of Genesis, right? We know that. We also know that there's texts. Well, it's a difficult thing to prove, but there's enough indication by the way the texts are woven together that there are texts that are not there. That as the editors wove together the materials, that there's pieces that they didn't take. So there are stories that were there that we don't have. We don't know what they are because we don't have them, and I mean, the theory is that Midrash, there is a theory that Midrash preserved some of those stories orally. They were brought back in, or they were kept in the Midrash. So even though we don't have them, there's a Midrash that actually goes back even further, or as an oral tradition, or maybe was what people did read in that original J text or E text before it was edited, and those stories, were preserved there. That's a possibility. No, we don't. Again, we'll never prove it. We can't prove it unless we find a text that's 3,000 years old. But we do know that there's things that were not there. There's things that were cut out. So the editors didn't feel that they weren't important for the text. They weren't important for the story. They were important for the way that the other person told the story. But if you're weaving it together and you're saying, well, I want to take this piece and that piece and that piece, if you're and we don't do things like that today. We don't for the most part create let's say a movie, or we don't really create any media where we take media from different places and stitch together and create a new media. I mean, it's
Happens
done
on YouTube all the time, doesn't it?
I was going to say it's not. We don't really have we don't we don't we don't really have a word for it yet. It is starting to come through in some of the viral videos that people put together where they'll edit stuff together and they'll
Pastiche. We have a word.
exactly. But there is a little bit of that, and there's people who I've seen,
Have we
especially
seen this story in other
people
places?
people who work in collage. People who work in collage oftentimes will do that. There were some artists like Dolly and some of the surrealists, some of the Dadaists that would take things from different places and pop them in and try to make a new thing out of that. But like as again, Rosemary said, the pastiche. But but um, but gosh, we don't do it a lot, and they did it, and unfortunately, again, if you're only left with the final collage, you don't know what the rest of the page looked like, the rest of the article that wasn't, plopped into the picture. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's tough, but
So have you found any other sources that tell this story? Anything
no,
at
no,
all?
it's only the only thing I said is the midrash. Sometimes people,
Yeah.
the theory is the midrash preserved those earlier tales. Sometimes when we find like a Canaanite text that seems a little similar, we're like, oh wait, maybe that's the real version or the early version of that story. And then there's a piece of that that wasn't there. I mean, sometimes our ancestors edited stuff out because it was theologically problematic too. They didn't like that part because it's not something that God does, or there's something here that we don't want, that's not our value kind of thing. So there was definitely some of that was done. But again, we don't know for sure, and we could never say we know for sure that this text was part of this and then wasn't there anymore. We just don't
Well,
have
it
that.
was probably an oral tradition, right? Before it's ever written
Well, it was
down.
these are all definitely oral traditions, but I'm
So
saying
people
even
would
the written,
change it
but
according to their.
even the written tradition, even the written text, not tradition, the written text. Somebody had this text, J. They took parts of it and they didn't take all of it. Okay, so
Yeah.
I don't know what to tell you other than it 100% was their stuff there we don't have. Now, this story right here, the most of this story that we have that we're sitting with right here is in chapter 12 is from one author, right? This is not one that goes back and forth. But um so it's difficult to say like, well, this got cut out from this part, but John's question is really like, why are some of the other stories about other things not there? And I would say to some extent, it's not on the agenda. It wasn't needed. So it was either the main author didn't write it, or the editor didn't keep it because it was not part of the agenda.
That's my point. That's my point. Even way back then, they were smart enough to know they had an agenda. So there's
Yeah,
all of a
yeah.
sudden it's like wham! All of a sudden the Egyptians are a great power. Really? Where'd that come from?
I've told you one of the most frustrating things is we know some things were not kept because of the length. It was literally editorial decision based on we don't have enough space for you to keep writing or for
But
you to take or for us to take that text. Sorry, we got to cut it. Look,
Yeah.
I told you before, how many television shows have we seen in our lives, especially for those of us who were raised in the age of a sitcom, of a 22-minute story where you had to have the 22 minutes there. If it went over, it had to be cut. Maybe a very funny scene got cut, a very funny little arc got cut out because it's 22 minutes. We have commercials, and that's what's going to go on. It's only lately where we've had these streaming services and these new formats where people have been able to write a show for whatever they wanted. And again, maybe you can make the argument that it takes a certain skill to format something. But again, how many songs do we have that had to be 3.5 minutes because they had to fit on a 45?
there,
What if the 5 minute or 6 minute version of the song we could have listened to? It's crazy how many things that we have in our world that were literally done because of space limitations, because somebody edited something, because somebody said, sorry, I don't have enough space for you on that. So it's weird to think.
okay. I mean, listen, I'm not going to beat the dead horse. I get it. You,
No,
you take the Bible as it is, not as you
well,
want
it's
it.
it's not just you just it's
But God had to have known.
it is frustrating. That's
God
a
had to have known that there were going to be these people millions of people lived and died based on these words that the editor who had or editors who had it because they had plenty of labor to write it down on their whatever they were. I'm just okay. Moving on. I'm just telling
no,
you.
no, it's true. It's true.
No,
We're
he
frustrated
makes a good
by
point.
the
It says
by the
more
stuff we
about
write down.
us. It says more about us, really, than it does about God, I think.
So,
What we thought was important at the time, or what that person thought was important.
well, let's read the next part because again, Abraham's fears, his projections, uh, they do come true in a way.
Okay, I've got another question here.
Yep.
Why is it? I mean, are we saying that the Egyptians somehow are morally inferior to all those people
Uh-huh.
that Abraham passed through on his way to Egypt? Those people didn't recognize Sarah's beauty, apparently, or or that Sarah suddenly became more beautiful as she went south. Uh, is
It
that
could,
what happened?
it could be other than we. I already told you we have a problem. We do have another version of the story, so we will read that Avram does the same thing with the Canaanites. So at least some of the Canaanites saw that she was beautiful enough to do this with a second time.
Or
So so
perhaps the
so
Egyptian women aren't as beautiful as all those other women. So she had become relatively beautiful because she's among the Egyptians. It just seems like they're setting it up for Egyptians.
there is going to be a setup here, but I just want to tell you, just understand that Avram does the same thing. Uh, Avram does the same thing uh, later on in chapter 20. So just remember the Canaanites are going to do the same thing the Egyptians do, which is they love a little they love their Sarah, man. That's why Sarah really needs to be played by somebody like, I don't know. I was gonna say Elizabeth Taylor, somebody who's like eyes or like something where they people just get lost in their eyes or something where they go, gosh, she's there's something captivating about her that they just can't, they can't give up or something. It's like there's something bewitching about her um, that defies age and defies
Sophia Loren.
Sophia Loren. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's other people that you could probably think of, but uh, I just think about Elizabeth Taylor's eyes. But they they there's something about her, no doubt. And
My
look what
wife,
happened. What?
my wife.
Your wife, beautiful. There you go. She's on. I know you said that because she's here with us, but no, it's true though. So yeah, you can say it. So, what happens when you go to a foreign country with your wife? Don't do this, even though it works out well for him. So here's what he does. Verse 13.
When Aram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw how very beautiful the woman was. Pharaoh's courtiers saw her and praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's palace. And because of her, it went well with Abram. He acquired sheep, oxen, donkeys, male and female slaves, jennies, and camels.
Yeah. Now, by the way, what's the
That's
King James for Jenny?
That's a cross between a a female donkey and a male horse, I believe.
Yes, but what's the King James for Jenny? I don't think
King
that's the
James says asses.
yeah, that's what I thought. So this is uh this is what Avram gets out of this deal. Now, what's interesting here is that in this case, it says specifically that he got Avadim and Shivchot, which are Avadim are male slaves and Shivchot are female slaves. A Shivcha is a female slave, kind of like a handmaid, kind of like maybe where he
He
got Hagar
swapped his
from.
wife for some handmaids. Hmm.
Uh-huh. He got handmaids. A Shivcha is a handmaid, female handmaid, yes. Uh, and again, this is the explanation for where he might have gotten the woman we know later as Hagar from, that she's part of this deal, which, for better or worse, becomes part of Avram's story. So that if Avram hadn't pulled this little deal, he wouldn't have wound up with Hagar, which means he wouldn't have wound up with the very difficult situation he finds himself in later with his two families. It's a lesson not to maintain two families. I'm not speaking, by the way, from personal experience. I'm just saying, if anything, this would be the reason why you don't have two families, because inevitably there's going to be problems. Um, there's going to be jealousies and rivalries, and this is not the way it necessarily was supposed to have gone down, but of course it does. So Avraham is right. They see how beautiful she was, and they do in fact take her to Pharaoh. Uh, what happens in Pharaoh's palace is not said.
So he's like actively trading her. He's not, it's not that they didn't take her. He actively traded her. Lovely. Very nice.
Wait. It doesn't say how the transaction went, how it was conducted, whether he had any say in it or how much say he had in it. He definitely did well from it, right? So it definitely worked out well for him. Again, I want to point out because earlier when it talks about him acquiring or making nefesh, that's not what happens here. So the reason that we can have a midrash on that is because we indeed have a part of the text that says Avram did acquire slaves. Um, and he acquired them as part of this acquisition of animals as well. So that's what it says happens in Egypt. Uh, so it works really well for him, for Avram. What happens to Sarah in Pharaoh's court is not spoken about. It doesn't say. But here's what happens in the story.
But God afflicted Pharaoh and his household with mighty plagues on account of Sarai, the wife of Abram. Pharaoh sent to Abram and said, "What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so that I took her as my wife? Now, here is your wife, take her and be gone." And Pharaoh put some men in charge of him, and they sent him off with his wife and all that he possessed.
Perfect time to read this, right? Right before Passover. We sometimes forget that Pharaoh and his household got hit by mighty plagues another time. Yeah, this is a definite foreshadow, folks. We forget that the plagues, we do that when we go to Egypt and they try to do stuff that shouldn't do, they get hit by plagues. So this is definitely foreshadowing. Now, Pharaoh uh, knows that this is because of Sarai and Avram. Doesn't say how. Doesn't say how. But of course, the Midrash imagines what that looked like, which is every time he tried to go to bed with Sarah, plagues happened. And in some versions of the Midrash, foreshadowings of the kinds of plagues that you get later, like blood and frogs and those kinds of things. Those types of plagues. That every time Pharaoh tries to take Sarah, that's what happens. Um, the Midrash preserves the Jewish tradition that's nothing happened. Nothing happened. Um, we don't know for sure. We don't know. We like to hope that nothing happened to our great, 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 great grandmother many times over. We'd like to hope that she doesn't get this is not a deal that's consummated, if you will. But yeah, this is a difficult thing to process at any level. And in the best case scenario, Avram leaves after the incident and he leaves with the stuff that he got. So, what do you make of this? Anybody? Any comments? Any thoughts? Without, again, I've told you a little bit about what the Midrash said, but in the sense that the Midrash does not like the idea that Pharaoh had didn't touch her at all. By the way, the Midrash also likes to imagine that Hashvarosh never slept with Esther. Uh, yeah, that's the Midrash.
This whole idea that he benefited from this was pretty not nice,
Yeah,
He comes out of here stronger than that, and he used her. I mean, like she's a piece of property, and he traded for something else. And
yeah. Look, the justification in the tradition is that this is the way Gentiles behave, and so you have to do this. You have to get them before they get you. So, any other comments before I'm going to lay some crazy stuff for you right now? Anybody? Hello? Anybody?
No,
Well,
nothing. Nothing.
Okay. Well, let me just tell you
Not for me.
what what happens here to the first Hebrew, the first Jew, our ancestor. Our ancestor lives in a dangerous world. And it's a dangerous world because of the Gentiles and the Gentiles who are in power. And they'll do stuff to you. They'll kill you and take your wife or daughter. They will, um, and I'm not telling you what's in the Torah. I'm telling you what's in thousands of years of midrash on this. What's thousands of years of Jewish imagination on this?
yeah, not much has changed.
What is, by the way, unfortunately, the Jewish reality for much of the last at least couple of thousand years, which is complete vulnerability. This type of story is unfortunately was played out too many times in Jewish history. It's when you read and you really consider, like, for us to read The Merchant of Venice and to live in America in the 20th and 21st centuries, you don't get it. I'm sorry. There's nothing I can do or you can do to read that and to go, I get it. You don't get it. You don't get it. We don't get it, thankfully, because we didn't live with that type of fear that most Jews lived with when they lived in a Christian world or in a world under Islamic law too, that we talked about this last Wednesday. When you live with that kind of vulnerability, you don't understand it. You have to be born into that and you have to live with that. For thousands of years, Avram's situation was read in a very special way, which is that when this kind of stuff can happen to you, when you're that vulnerable, you do what you have to do to survive. So you may not like it. I definitely don't like it. But this idea that you have to pull stuff off like this in order to survive has been part of Jewish consciousness for thousands of years. And it's sometimes hard for us to get rid of it. The justification for bad behavior oftentimes has been, and I'm saying it because it is today, and you know what I'm talking about. And I'm not talking about Jewish criminality. I'm talking about Jewish ethical lapses are oftentimes based on, and we still do it, thankfully not as much because our kids have not been raised with, and again, I know we're going back to some of these legitimate fears, but they've not been raised with a situation where I better take advantage of them before they take advantage of me. And that was unfortunately too much a part of our consciousness for the last 2,000 years. It's not easy to get rid of because it lingers. But again, you don't have power. You only have power in the way that you deal with the things that are under your control, which includes not necessarily always being ethical, with the justification that look at Avram, look at Jacob when we get to them. They don't always do ethical things. But the justification is they had no choice. This was for survival. So the text is oftentimes not even read with a certain kind of bias towards what Abraham has, but it's the bias of this is the way I live. If if the czar's government is going to steal from me and is going to take my kids and conscript them into the army, I'm not going to pay taxes. I'm not going to report to the Russians what I'm doing in my business. I'm not going to tell them the alcohol that I'm selling out of my tavern. Are you kidding me? I live in fear every day that they're going to come in and break everything that I have in my place. You know, the stuff that you saw in Fiddler on the Roof. I mean, that was real. So how do you justify this is my life? This is the way I have to live. It didn't again. I'm not saying that this is justifies criminality, but it definitely justified the way that people did business and the way they looked at their Gentile neighbors with a sense of fear and with a sense of I better do what I can while I can with my own power, with the things that are under my control. And it still lingers. It still lingers. So yeah, I don't like it. I'm not saying it's okay. On the contrary, I don't think it's okay. I think we need to hopefully make this part of our past. But yeah, this was a justification for this becomes a justification for ethical, what we would call ethically, you know, bad behavior. Especially again, I mean, I don't know whatever justification there is, but when you feel like I got to do what I got to do, yeah, you live a little differently. So, yeah, what I'm saying is this was not an ancient story. Yeah. So, um, yeah.
Well, you can see it played out today in Israel defending herself,
Well, I think
maybe doing some things that you don't necessarily
yeah,
feel is justified,
th-
but
th- there definitely are examples of that in politics too, of saying, look, you know, we have to do what we can do within the the rules that we have to play by. Yeah, I would say there's some similarities to that.
yeah, and
But
Iran is definitely a threat. You know, it's very threatening.
there's there is something here though that's very human, which is how people behave when they're afraid. And to me, what Avram does is it's it's it, you know what it is? It's this line here. Why have you done this to me? Yeah. What is this you've done to me? Why did you not tell me? Like, you know, he's the
Did you
voice.
assume I was going to act badly?
Yeah, it's Pharaoh being the voice of morality. He allowed, I mean, that's what hits me is that he made this person, and again, we have to assume, you know, as Pharaoh, he wasn't necessarily the most morally upright person, but he's the voice of morality here. And that's what hits me. That's what gets me. Um, it's you know, every year that I read this and I read about Avram and I, you know, I think about Jewish history, I think about my own life, I think, you know, whatever the wherever I am in life, and you think about this kind of stuff and you go, how have I made my, you know, have I made decisions based on fear? Have I made my decisions based on, you know, ethical considerations, you know, all of these things. But man, when the person that you were scared of, who you assume was going to do the wrong thing, ends up being the person who chastises you, I mean, that's a gut punch. That's a gut punch to me. I mean, it would be. Thankfully, I've never been in a situation where a person who, you know, I assumed was going to be of low moral character ended up. I've never been surprised that way, but gosh, I mean, thinking about it, imagining it, it would be terrible if it was legit, you know, and it is. So he winds up with everything that he got from the deal. The foreshadowing here for Egypt is, I'm going to just tell you, the Midrash to some extent is going to tell us that we have to pay the price for this. The Egyptians they got something on us because of this. So the fact that end up going back down there and getting punished is retribution to some extent. That's one of the explanations. You're going to say, "Oh, that's not fair." Hundreds of years of slavery, you know, generations of people that are worked to the death because of this. But if we get into a situation where we have to pay back, you know, this is one possibility. Look, we're going to finish with this today, with this thought as we go into Passover, which is that at the very least, our ancestors are not perfect people, and whatever Avram does here that's really bad or marginally bad, this isn't good. At the very least, he doesn't have faith in God. At the very least, he was not supposed to go down to Egypt. He was not supposed to give up. That's the very least. At the very worst, he's a pimp. Somewhere in the middle, probably, is what we have to deal with. But it's not good. And so there's a real realization here as we begin to talk about the first Jewish family, that the first Jewish family is definitely not perfect. It is dysfunctional. They make mistakes. They're not perfect. They're not. There's no way you can rationalize this. And yet we keep their stories alive. We look at them for lessons, not just what we're supposed to do, but what we're not supposed to do. And I always remind people of that whenever I do a funeral, especially for somebody who's been problematic in their lives. You know, we say we learn from what they did, and both good and bad. We learn from the good stuff they did, and we learn from the stuff we don't want to repeat. We don't have to only learn the good lesson. We learn the lesson that's sometimes harder, and the lesson of what not to do.
You know, Rabbi, the more and more granular we get, the more and more we dig into this, the more and more I have more questions. And
Good.
Well, no, but my questions, but you know, you made a very broad statement. You know, he's either this or he's all the way down to that, right?
No, that's not a broad statement. That's a spectrum of what could happen. That's the spectrum. I don't know where he is on the spectrum.
But the fact is we don't even know the agenda of the authors or the editors. And so we're relying on midrash of rabbis who are saying, this is what we hoped. They're trying to fill in the gap. You know, it's quite crazy, isn't it, though? Right?
Yes. But most importantly, John, and some of you know what I'm about to say. It's not. It's not what the rabbi said. It's not what I said. It's not what somebody said 2,000 years ago. It's what you take away from it. It's what you say. The important midrash here is not. It's not. It's not. It's not. I'm only showing you this stuff because I'm here to help teach it and to show it to you. I'm telling you, you've got to walk away with this and make sense of it. You have to walk away from this and say, look, how is a man that we know is a man of faith? He has such faith that he's going to pick up his life and go to a new land. How does a man with that kind of faith do this? Same guy. He's the same guy. So you and I have to make sense of it because that's what the Bible gave us. At the very least, that's what I'm saying. You have to understand this is what we have. This is the text. This is what our ancestors wanted us to deal with. They wanted us to learn from this.
Is there
This is
physical
the
evidence?
father of faith is not without fear.
We
Is
all
there
stumble.
is there physical evidence to support this text?
No, no, there's not a lot of physical. There's as far as the Torah itself, as Genesis all the way to Deuteronomy, we don't really have we don't have a lot of archaeological evidence for pretty much anything until we get to about the time of King David. The other problem is, but on the other hand, I will say this: there's not a lot that we read about, and this is true. I mean, you can look this up. I can just tell you, the world that the Bible describes of Avram and Sarai, right? The world that they describe, for the most part, and I will point it out. I'll point it out when it's there. Is pretty accurate. What we know archaeologically about what the world was like and what that area was like at the time is consistent with the description of Avram and Sarai. I will say this, not a huge deal, but the camel was not domesticated in this part of the world at that point yet, but it will be soon. It's not that weird, but I will point it out because you did ask about archaeology. Camels were not yet domesticated in the land of Israel during the time of Avram. So anytime you see that, it's anachronistic. It was not there. The camels were not there yet, but they will be soon. It's not that it's 1,000 years later. It's a few hundred years later, but yes, we have no evidence that there were domesticated camels in that part of the world yet. Now, uh, again, at the end of the day, it's not about
When did the
anything other
Egyptians
than what
get
you take
horses?
away from it. What?
When did the Egyptians get horses? I was watching that movie David, the one on
Yeah,
Prime, and they
yeah.
had these big horses and stuff.
Uh-huh.
They didn't have horses like that. The Egyptians had short little ponies that pulled chariots. They didn't have big steeds and horses.
No, but they had horses. So I'm not gonna say that, I'll point out if it's like totally anachronistic. There aren't many places where, as I said, where the Bible is talking about something that just is not. It's not archaeologically.
Well,
It's not
mules. Did they have
historically.
mules?
Yep, yep, yep. So those are there. And yeah. But I do want to say, as we wrap up today, we finish and again next week we're gonna pick up in chapter 13 with Avram's journeys. Not an easy story, not an easy text to get hit with Avram right away. By the beginning of the chapter, we learn about this wonderful guy that's our ancestor, and by the by the end of the chapter, hey, not so perfect. Not the guy that we would not necessarily. This is not necessarily the guy we'd like to be left with, but it's our job to understand him. It's our job to explain it, explain what we can learn, make sense of it, and to be part of it. And as since you guys brought it up, and since occasionally I will leave you with this, the reason that I read this, the reason I love it, is because my Bible teacher, uh, Richard Elliott Friedman, who wrote the Bible, he left the rabbinic world. He was going to study to be a rabbi at JTS. He ended up becoming a professor of the Bible for many years at UCSD and then at University of Georgia. Uh, he wrote the great book Who Wrote the Bible, and he wrote it while I was his student. Uh, the reason that I didn't go into biblical studies is because he makes a point at the end of the book, the very last line of Who Wrote the Bible, kind of changed my life. He said, at the end of the day, it's not who wrote the Bible, but who reads it. And so it's not about who wrote the Bible. And that's one of the reasons I didn't study it, because I did learn a lot. I'd love to have learned more, but I've learned a lot about who wrote the Bible. But at the end, it's about us. It's about us reading it, and it's about us walking away with some lessons that are not always easy. And this is definitely one of those days where you read it and you go, oh yeah, we got to do better than this. And we'll read a few. We'll read a few when it comes to Abraham, uh, definitely with Jacob, and then occasionally with, as we know, with some of our other heroes, as we read in the rest of the Tanakh, in the stories about David. It's wonderful that they're making movies about David, but they need to make movies really about David, which most people are afraid to do because he's so problematic, and he's got so many. There's so much complexity to him that most people in the traditional world, or people who are worried about the fundamentalist or evangelical world, are not going to deal with it, because it's and I mean, to some extent, the Orthodox Jewish world, but the Orthodox Jewish world is not going to stop you from making a biblical movie. and protest in front of your house and tell you that you're a blasphemer. But it would be good if somebody did a real legitimate biblical movie. They did with the Richard Gere version of King David, but the movie didn't do very well and didn't really find an audience. If you don't, that's the catch-22. If you make a biblical movie, you've got to make it enjoyable and accessible and not an affront to the Bible believers and then the literalists, and at the same time, it makes it hard to make a Bible story that really is true to the Bible. You have to really kind of tweak it in order to make it palatable, because otherwise people are left with these stories and they feel not very good. Well, happy Passover, everybody, and we hope that you have a safe and healthy and happy holiday. We wish people a Zissen Pesach, a sweet Pesach, as our ancestors would say, our Yiddish ancestors. And one of our next classes, we don't have Wednesday night class, but one of our next classes, we're going to be looking at European Judaism and Yiddish in particular. How do we get Yiddish? How do we get this amazing language that still is very much a part of our consciousness, even if we're not very fluent in it, but also to some extent part of our American consciousness, because they have so many wonderful Yiddish words. So that's one of our next Wednesday night classes as well. So Aziz and Pesach, a Hag Kasher v'Sameach, a great Passover, and some of you will see second Seder, but wherever you're going to be celebrating Passover, we hope it's a good one. We hope you have some slivovitz. We're going to be providing it at our second night Seder, and I just picked up the bottles at Total Wine, and part of the holiday. Part of the holiday, everybody. Take care.
Thanks,
What do you
Rabbi.
think?
See you tomorrow.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.